Hello everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Dmitry Vinnik, and as you can see from the title, we will talk something related to stress. This is not about stress testing. Like, to be very clear, the title I've been trying to call it fancy, because everything these days is developer. It's very like domain-driven, resume-driven, whatever the event-driven. This one is the stress-driven, and basically how to avoid stress-driven development in the workplace. But first and foremost, I need to make this thing work. Okay, doesn't work this thing. Okay, it's okay. So, yeah, let's first establish the goals for today's presentation, because again, you still will have a chance to potentially go to another talk, to another session. So I want to be very clear of what's the goals for today will be. So the first and foremost, I really want to talk about the stress as a whole, to basically have a better understanding of the reasons, origins, and of the stress itself. Then I'll try to highlight some of the practices of how to deal with stress, whether it's in your personal life and a work-life balance as well. So we'll talk about that. And hopefully I'll end this talk on a positive note and try to highlight the ways to move forward from the currently fairly stressful life that most of us lead, myself included. So let's begin it by discussing the stress as a whole and why we even should talk about it in the first place. So it's always nice to look outside, because it's hard to basically do the self-analysis to begin with. So if you look externally, it's fairly easy to look for the examples of stress. This now infamous letter from the partner or spouse of one of the Electronic Arts employees. If you're familiar with Electronic Arts, it's a gaming company, and they notoriously have a problem with overtime work hours. So this basically letter was about a wife whose husband has been working so much, and she described how it affected their family life, his health and her health as well, and the health of their kids. So it's not just an individual issue at that point. This has been like back in 2004. By now it's a fairly old letter. Later, again, another gaming company, you can already see some pattern, but it doesn't have to be necessarily the gaming company alone. But in this example, the Rockstar employees, I believe actually in this case it were more of contractors that work with Rockstar, but again, people voiced the concerns of those overtime hours and how it affected their families and the stress that didn't just stay in the workplace. People always carried back to their homes. So that was a bigger issue. And one of the most recent ones, at least more public, especially in North America, it was a company called Telltale. I believe if you've seen the Walking Dead games, like Wolf Among Us, a bunch of games that they built, they recently laid off their staff. And this is like now kind of a fairly popular tweet that was made by Brandon Sebenka. I'm not going to even try to pronounce, actually I've tried. But that being said, the main point that he highlighted, a fairly obvious idea that really the work is just work. Your life and your health is much more important than that. So that's been all nice and good. Talk outside is fairly easy. And there are a lot more cases. I have a whole list. It's actually a list online that's been kept by some, very dedicated people. But that being said, if you try to look internally and even look at your colleagues, your family, or yourself, it becomes like more of a personal issue. And I've talked at GeeCON Prague about this exact topic, and I've shared this story before, but if I were to share my story once more and how I've dealt with stress before. So, I'm a fairly active guy by now. Not long time ago, I've been moving to Canada, so I've been going through immigration process, which is quite intense, doing full-time school, full-time work, so it was quite heavy, I would say. And even for my very young age, I'm just in my 20s at the time. And around fall of 2015, I had a somewhat unpleasant experience, I would say, to put it lightly. So basically, at some point, I remember it was evening, I think I had a job, I had to work that day, so I came home, I was preparing my dinner, and I felt like left arm felt very light. It was bizarre, but okay, maybe I slept on that, that's fine. Went away. Then I was actually cooking dinner at the time. Then I feel like my left leg goes numb. I was like, that never happened before. That's bizarre. And I was like, you know what I need to do first? Turn off my stove, because the food, that's what I was thinking the most about. And then I felt like the whole left side of my body started going numb. And ultimately I decided, okay, I think it's time to call the ambulance, because by the time I was calling, my speech was slurry. You know, basically the whole left side of my face went numb. So I couldn't even pronounce the street I was living in. I was like, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. Because, you know, when you slur speech, and I wasn't having fun that night, so I wasn't drinking, that it was really bizarre experience. So I've called them. And I ultimately ended up in an emergency in the ER. Canadian ER is very bizarre to begin with, but honestly, by the time of my visit to the hospital, what we figured out, it wasn't a stroke or anything like that, but ultimately it was a panic attack. So apparently, because of the overwork that I had endured and a bunch of other stress, ultimately I ended up in the hospital. And fortunately enough, I've talked to my doctor, and he highlighted that if you want to keep going like that, you basically end up with a real stroke. So it won't be just a panic attack and just a scare. So it will be much, much worse, because nobody wants to have a stroke at that, especially at the age of 20, so that's not that great. So even though it was an unwanted experience for myself, I would say it actually was fairly beneficial. And the reason why I'm saying that is because these sort of things become a very good motivator to change your practices, to your routine. And that's where, if I were to highlight the general idea of the motivators that affect our life, at least help us to change it. One of the most frequent ones that people follow is the motivator of fear. In my case, even though it wasn't an actual stroke or an attack of any kind, still you feel like, oh my, it's actually, I might be dying, because that's what you feel at that point. That's why the panic attacks are really personal in general. For some people, it's a very close death call or something like that. That's a major thing that helps them to change their life, and it's a big motivator for them. For some people, it's the idea of purpose. For lots of people in the world, it's maybe birth of a child. They change the way how they view the life in general, their work and their practices and their routines. Religion for some people is a good motivator as well. The religion as a whole, whether you're religious or not, it's just an idea of a community is really important for us. It's regardless of whether you believe or not. The whole point of having people who you're going to interact and change your life for the better, it's going to be a huge help. And that's why I always highlight that the community, you have to find it and work along with them. If you have a problem, struggle with an addiction of any kind, that's why Alcoholics Anonymous, even though they are very connected to the church, at least from its origin, their whole purpose of working through the addiction as the community is really helpful. So overall, let's say we found the motivator and to work with through our stresses. It's not as simple. So after we find the motivator, the good question to ask is, what do we do now? And it's important to not just find the motivation to change, is to first acknowledge the problem and to identify the problem. And to approach the stress, we can't approach it from all stress being bad, because not all stress is bad. And it's a very definitive answer, that it's not, stress is not equal. Because the stress as a whole, the very fact that we still have that highlights that the nature is actually a smart thing. We would not have stress if it wasn't useful for us, because stress has a really legit purpose. One of the purposes, obviously, is this fight or flight response. In the past, where many years ago, where if let's say we are hunter-gatherers, right? If you go in the jungle and you meet a predator, you have a response. It's a major stressor, right? If you see a cougar or I don't know, a bear, it's going to be quite a stress, hopefully, unless you're a sociopath or something. But you'll have a choice to make: is you're going to fight or flee, right? So it's very important to acknowledge the stress is important in those situations. The fact that we are able to be sleep deprived for a short period of time with almost no effect on our health. Again, if you look back when, let's say, you're tracking an animal for many years, or sorry, not years, but days, you sometimes have to skip on sleep. And to be able to deal with the stress of deprivation of sleep, is the whole idea that the stress of being able to endure that while hunting helped us a lot to succeed and ultimately to evolve and be where we are now. And be able to go through hunger, because we're not always successful when we hunt. So all those stressors that we might be coming from the past really highlight that we would not have them unless they were useful, at least at some point in our lives. And this is kind of makes a dilemma that if stress makes sense, why do we still feel bad? Why do we, overeat? Why are we undersleep constantly? Why are we always under pressure and feel bad about ourselves every so often? It's because there are two main types of stress that we encounter. There is a short-term stress, more of an acute stress, like if you go to sauna, it's a short-term acute stress, the heat shocks, which is good for your body. It's been proven by many studies by now. But the thing that we're trying to avoid and really that affect our health the most is so-called long-term stress. It's the example where I gave you that you can endure short sleep deprivation while you're hunting. That's okay. But if you're constantly undersleeping, preparing for your exams, and you always procrastinate and you have to sleep just 4 or 3 hours a day, it's not going to be good for your health. And that's the whole point, that you're trying to avoid the long-term stress. But the short-term stress is still good for us, because the whole point of stress in humans is that it was beneficial at some point, so it's still going to be beneficial for us. And I'm going to highlight how we can incorporate our short-term stress and try to eliminate the long-term stress. And that's what this whole talk is about. So overall, the conclusion, again, the fact that we will try to incorporate short-term stress and acknowledge that life, unfortunately, is not stress-free, so we'll try to use that through our practices to improve our lives. And we will do our best to eliminate the long-term stress. So, that being said, it's always easy to talk about that, but it's fairly complex to implement, right? So, fortunately enough, there is a good old trick that we all use and follow regardless of what sort of things we do. It's the famous divide and conquer, right? So this is how we're going to structure our talk today. If we acknowledge 4 main grounds for stress, just fairly generic types or grounds, that places that we can encounter different stressors. First and foremost is sleep. I've kind of mentioned it multiple times because we all have to sleep. Unless you have that infamous gene that allows you to sleep 4 hours a day and feel fresh. If you think that you are one of those people, there's a 4% in the whole population, entire population of the world. If you are one of those people, I want to chat with you for sure, because it's awesome. But that being said, we most likely have to sleep a lot. The nutrition is how we eat, really affects all parts of our lives. Obviously the fitness, whether it's mental or physical fitness, and last but not least is the work stressors. So that's what we're going to talk about as well today. But I want to be positive, because as I said before, I want to end this talk on a positive note. We'll approach it from the opposite direction, where we talk about ground not for stress, but the grounds to improve our lives, or grounds for anti-stress. So with that, let's start by discussing sleep as a stressor and how to deal with that and how to improve that. So if you're still questioning whether you should sleep or why we need sleep, that's an interesting question to ask. I mean, I would love to have a sleep right now, because the jet lag is still hitting me hard. That being said, still asking for reasons to sleep. First and foremost, sleep really is being proven to help with the depression. If you undersleep, the anxiety is going to eventually hit you. You can sometimes have a sleep deprivation, as I said before, an exam, maybe once in a while. It might be fine, but if you do it constantly, the whole point of this long-term undersleeping condition is going to ultimately affect you. And it's been proven that actually leads to major diseases. So if you sleep, you might avoid them. There have been studies that showed some connection to the Alzheimer and other major issues that you might encounter, especially later in life, which highlights that the sleep deprivation effects are very long-lasting. So they don't show up right away. So you might say that, or you might approach the sleep, and some people do, as kind of a loan system. I'm going to sleep this Monday through Thursday or through Friday. I'm going to sleep maybe 4 hours, but then Saturday and Sunday I'm going to sleep 12 hours. You can't really do that well, and it's been shown quite extensively. So it doesn't work that way. It's long-lasting. It's the consistency that matters. It's also been shown that the sleep helps with creativity. The sleep has been separated into multiple stages, and one of the most important stages really help you with your solving creative problems, and ultimately, even as they call it, flashing out the memories. When they say sleep on this idea, it's actually not just a saying for the sake of it. Again, it's been scientifically proven that when you sleep on a problem, or you sleep on a certain issue that you're trying to resolve, there's a good chance in the morning you'll be able to come up with the new ideas. So it's also been shown to improve skills. But if you still need convincing whether you need to sleep, there is an awesome book by Matthew Walker. It's a fairly lengthy book. I've personally listened to the audio version of it and still enjoyed it greatly. It's Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker. I believe he's a chief sleep scientist in Google right now. That's a cool title to have. That being said, that's an awesome book to get started with. So basically, whoever you are, if you're a business person, if you're a manager, developer, a parent, he talks in length on all sorts of people that have to sleep and why they need to sleep and what effects they might have of undersleeping. So give it a try. But even though we kind of know why we need to sleep, a good question to ask is how we sleep well, like how to sleep healthy. And the path to the healthy sleep is the avoiding light and noise pollution. So light and noise pollution in general, it affects us in a bad ways. This whole blue light, if you use the phones or laptops, try to install things like a red shift or night shift, whatever the name is, where you have a dimmed light in the evening, so it doesn't disturb your sleep patterns. When it comes to the controlling your environment, if you are sleeping at home, not on the plane like I do lately, try to change your sheets every once in a while, because it really affects how you sleep. Like you sleep on a clean sheets, it's actually been shown that it improves the quality of your sleep. And really try to go for the 8 hours uninterrupted sleep. I mean, even though there have been books that just approach it from the point of sleep cycles, it's still 8 hours can't be beaten really, regardless of your age though. But life happens, right? So even if you can sleep 8 hours, try to still wake up at a constant time. So even if you have to go to bed like at 1 a.m., try to still wake up at 8 a.m. next day. Because that's you basically train your body to wake up and get going early on a certain point. It's all the point of consistency you're gonna go for. That's me, tired on a plane. I have to control my environment in kind of a hardcore way, but even on a plane I'm able to do that. I have that crazy earmuffs, the noise cancelling earmuffs. It's like it's a construction grade. I can basically drill holes in the roads and feel nothing. I have like the polar bear sleeping mask. Don't see a single dim of light. I have a brain FM. It's basically the ambient sound that helps me to avoid all those noises. And I have an awesome pillow, travel rest. So with that, no kid ever can disturb my sleep on a plane. Hopefully you don't do it at home where you have an actual kid of your own. Potentially, it's like, oh, I want to have my 8 hours of sleep. You can do that, but on a plane, feel free to do so. This is another great book on how to sleep. Very good practices by Nick Littlehales. He was a sleeping coach in one of the major national teams for cyclists and I think some soccer teams as well in London. So it's a great book as well to give a try. So sleep is important, food is as important, maybe if not more. So this saying, wherever it was originated, I'm not going to try to pronounce this person's name. Oh my. But ultimately, it's you are what you eat. Because if we eat badly, it will affect all parts of our life. If you eat, again, not well, or you mostly eat fast food, it will affect how you do your job, how you talk to your family in the evening, because you get grumpy, you get a sugar rush, and I'll talk about that in a second. Just the general nutrition ideas, the points that I personally follow, is that diets should be avoided at all costs. All those fancy words like paleo, keto, carnivore diet, it's all about the moderation. Whether it's in food or in life, you shouldn't go for those extremes, to those dogmas. We're all unique, we're all different. And ultimately, you're trying to experiment with your body. Don't just go for whatever works for, these people, they follow keto and they feel great. Give it a try, see how it works for you, but don't just follow it blindly and completely cut out of carbs and do all the crazy stuff people do sometimes. But honestly, before you do any of that, do some tests, like blood tests and stuff. Can you even do that? Or make sure that you have enough nutrients. So follow those, but ultimately make sure that you don't just be dogmatic when it comes to diets and nutrition. But generally speaking, try to avoid sugars. If you've seen me yesterday in the open space, you might call me a hypocrite, because the amount of beer we drank was kind of high. That being said, the sugars I'm talking about here are those processed sugar that we often encounter, all those sweets that we have to eat, or actually most of the food that we encounter these days. Just try to cut down on that. It will highly improve your life. I'm not talking about keto, but just cut down that and really try to improve the numbers of like greens that you eat, some salads and stuff. If you struggle with that like I did, buy like a mixer and do some green juices and stuff. It's actually quite fun, and you feel healthy and you even look healthy. You know, it's like, oh my god, I have a green smoothie that I've made. You know, at least you look healthy and stuff. So give it a try. It really improves your health and the quality of your life. That's for sure. But overall, the key to food control, I personally found intermittent fasting. Many people talk about that, but the thing I try to highlight is not this whole like just the fab of it. What I like is this whole 16-8 model that people usually follow, where you basically fast for 16 hours, you don't eat for 16 hours, and 8 hours window is when you eat. To give an example is basically you eat between noon and 8 p.m. or between 1 o'clock and 9 o'clock. The way you structure it, whatever works best. I personally used to do it 1 to 9 because I would have like spin class from 12 to 1. You don't want to eat before that or something like that. So structure it around your day. Make sure that works for you. Because the reason why I always try to push for it, it's not this whole just for the sake of it, but that you really don't have this stuffed feeling. We eat like breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time with no gap in between almost, you feel like you stuffed for the entirety of the day. You're like, you can basically roll down the hill because you're feeling so stuffed. Especially go to Norwegian conferences, sometimes you eat so much that it's insane. So really, with intermittent fasting, you're avoiding that feeling. There have been some longevity studies around this point. It's mostly on mice, where they showed like, oh, they are more, they're smarter after some fasting, and I'm not going to push for that much. That being said, there are some cool stuff going on the scientific level. Podcast-wise, when it comes to nutrition, I like to follow Ben Greenfield. He's a cool dude. Very smart he's a very famous fitness trainer and also nutrition guru. Model Health Show. I don't like the name of the podcast. Sounds very pretentious, but it's actually very nice. Very positive podcast that I highly recommend. And the Human Optimization Hour is another one. Bunch of American shows, basically. But it's a great podcast overall. And I have links on these slides that I shared. And of course, you already heard of these simple nutritional rules. I mean, I'm not a nutritionist by any means. That being said, I'm just talking from my personal experience. And the main things I say are try it out for yourself. Don't follow any dogmas. But when it comes to how to make sure you incorporate that well, is that even though it all sounds simple and easy, to implement those habits that I've mentioned, whether it's nutrition or sleep, the good way to incorporate habits is basically through understanding what drives our daily habits, our daily routines. And we all follow fairly simple rules for any habit of any sort, whether it's a bad or a good habit. All habits follow the so-called habits loop, where you basically have a cue, something that triggers the behavior. You have the behavior itself, the action that you do, and the reward. Some feeling of satisfaction sometimes some actual reward of any kind. And it keeps going. A good example, just to give you kind of an illustration. There is an awesome book that, again, I'll recommend later about habits. But there's been a study of a woman who's had a problem where she was basically biting her nails to the bone almost. So she was going really crazy about it. And she worked with her therapist on this issue because she couldn't control herself. So the way they approached it is they first established the cue, what triggers that behavior. And the behavior was she felt a tingling feeling in her nails, or something. It was like they were itching a bit. It's just annoying for her. Then they've established the routine. The bad routine in this case is the biting of the nails. And the reward for her was they stopped itching after she beat them for a while. So the way they approach and the way we should approach our bad habits in general or enforce the good habits is that they've used the same cue, itching nails. The routine of biting they've replaced with she was sitting on her nails now. So as soon as she feels like an itch, she basically puts her fingers under her like bottom part, she sits down on them, and as a result the same reward of satisfaction of the feeling of the itching basically went away. So they've replaced the routine, they've reused the same cue and the same reward, and that's exactly how we should approach any habit. We should not be fighting with ourselves, we should work along. It's the collaboration. Otherwise you're going to suffer. You don't want to suffer. Life is short. Doesn't make sense. So try to replace that routine. The same goes for like go for a run. Find the routine that you currently have and try to replace the bad routines with the good ones. But really to enforce it in a better way, even though I've said quite a bit so far, even with these 2 points of like just food and the sleep, the way to begin the change is through so-called keystone habits. And keystone habits are fairly trivial. It's basically something that if you stick with it, it will affect all parts of your life. It changes the entire behavior, which ultimately affects all other areas of your daily or just life routine in general. For example, one of the major keynote habits that we all sometimes see, it's the general fitness, going for a run. It's a keystone habit because if, let's say, you run in the morning or during the day, you will feel good about yourself for the duration of the day or at least a week. Because this idea of small wins, these whole keystone habits, they help you to go through the day with a positive note. For example, Michael Phelps is a good example. You probably heard of him. He's like a very famous Olympian, won a bunch of medals in swimming. But you know, by the time he would go and compete in the Olympic Games, by then he already had so many small wins. You know, his music that he set up, his personal playlist, worked in the morning because he prepared it the day before. He prepared the clothes the day ahead. So when he wakes up, he sees his shorts and t-shirt already prepared for him in the morning. It's so easy to get started because it's a small win because it's already prepared for him to get going with. It's those small wins that you're trying to establish and they will help you to get going. It's all about just starting the routine. It will really help you to transform your all other parts of your life. Because it all has this ripple effect. You know, when you throw a rock in a river, you see those ripples coming away from it. That's the whole point of these keystone habits you're trying to enforce. And this is again that book I've mentioned, Habits. It's again great book. Highly encourage you to even listen to it because who reads these books these days? So Audible is great. Give it a try. The Power of Habit. I liked it a lot. So let's get going and talk about fitness because this one is a lengthy one. Because fitness is not just physical, it's also mental. And we'll be talking about physical first because that's the most trivial one when it comes to fitness. But then we'll talk about mental fitness and how it helps us and acknowledges stress, whether it's at work or in personal life. So physical fitness overall, it's again that whole point of keystone habits. They really reside here. You know, this whole idea of going for a run, it's very popularized by the idea of physical fitness. Another thing we'll take a look at when it comes to physical fitness is how to incorporate variation of physical fitness in your daily life, how to integrate it, and ultimately how to use it flexibly in your daily routines. So let's look at the keystone habits again a little bit closer. If you approach fitness as a habit, what's important to identify the triggers. How do you even force yourself? Hopefully you don't have to force, but at the beginning everyone has to force a change. How do you force yourself to go to the gym or go for a run in the morning? It's again to avoid and remove all those roadblocks. So when again you wake up in the morning, you already have your bag prepared for going to the gym in the morning. Or after work, if you have a bag prepared, or some people like to go and buy personal trainer memberships, so like just have an arrangement. As much as I'm not a huge fan of personal trainers in general, this idea of commitment really helps people to get started. And I would encourage you to try that as well. Is that you have some trigger that you've identified. Maybe it's the feeling, oh, I've already spent some money, I have to go. Not the best trigger, but it's a good thing to kind of establish this habit. And find the reward. I mean, don't go like, you know, eat a hamburger after every workout. It's actually a common problem. People sometimes end up overeating because they think, oh, I ran for 15 minutes, now I'm free to eat as much as I want. It usually doesn't end up well. That being said, you can like afford, you know, going out for you know, for food, for drinks, or whatever you want. Because again, as I've said before, life is short. Enjoy it. We have to enjoy it. I'm not like, but don't try to go for the workout because you're trying to eat more. You know, I've met so many people. I was in Dublin recently. I was going on a tour of the nature around Dublin, which is awesome. And I met that guy, I think from Tennessee. And he basically said, oh yeah, I was fasting for the past like 2 days so I can like go to Oktoberfest. And I'm like, oh my God, don't do that. Don't like, force yourself like to not eating or exercising like crazy so you can then go and drink or eat a lot the next day. Everything is in moderation. Just go and drink on any day of the week if you want to. But don't do it like to offset one or another. But establishing goals is very important as well. Have this kind of commitment. Maybe sign up for a marathon or a short run, or go out with your buddies or your colleagues. And find the community. That's what's very important for any sort of exercises or routines. That's where I always acknowledge the idea of gamification of workout is very important. The great app that I personally use a lot called Strava. Basically, it helps you to track your mileage, how much you run. It actually tells you we finished 1 kilometer, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see your other buddies on that app. You can basically work out with them, even though they're somewhere in other parts of the world. So it's an awesome app to try. There are more like expensive and extensive one, like My Zone Tracker and other wearables of any kind, if it's Fitbit or whatever. Gamification is very useful though. It's because they help you with the reward part, or actually being able to stick to it. When it comes to the variation of fitness, have acute stress of any kind. Studies shown that the acute stress of sauna, basically it's dry heat, especially after 20 minutes in the sauna, obviously depending on the temperature in the sauna, helps out quite a bit, specifically like mitochondria activities. So you have to, or I would highly encourage you to try to incorporate that into your daily routine, especially if you're preparing to go to like Texas or something. Going to sauna ahead of time always helps. If you do some cardio like running or going like cycling, try to vary that. You don't want to, again, it's all about the moderation. You don't want to just jump into that and keep running and ruining your knees. Make sure you have a comfortable, footwear or clothes, and change up with that. So it's all about just having a cardio in general. And change the focus again of what muscles you're working on. Because you don't want to go, all the way focusing on one particular muscle. And try to incorporate yoga. Some people call it active recovery. Yoga is awesome. Like it's great. It's fairly extensive. It's complicated. It's hard for like core. But that being said, they also like stretching, and it's good for like having mixed up with cardio. So really try to work out with that as well. But when it comes to the integration in your daily life, especially the work life, what I always encourage people to do is to have an active commute. Unfortunately, especially in America, we have a very long commute every once in a while. So it's great to do some stuff like biking. Scooters, I don't encourage that personally, but you can do that. Running is great, maybe walking to work, but if you have to drive for many hours, that thing I do not encourage. But active commute is generally cool. But important to actually mark it in your calendar. If you have in your workday, make sure you have a slot for going to the gym, whether it's end of the day, middle of the day. Otherwise, you don't treat it. It's not as important. I would personally cancel a meeting because I have a workout schedule for 12 to 2 or something like that. So make sure it's as important to you, because your health is as important, actually more important than your work. So because that thing you can't replace. So mark it in your calendar. Do the desk rotation. Don't go all crazy about, I only do standing desk. Standing desks are not great either if you do it the whole day, all 8 hours. Try to change up, do like a couple hours standing, sitting. I personally also have like a fitness ball. I have a treadmill desk as well. Especially for annoying long meetings, I like to do it on the treadmill because I want to finish it as soon as possible. It's a good encouragement motivator. So have that going for you as well. And really prepare for the boredom plan. People often, especially with these fancy offices with lots of snacks, they middle of the day, they sometimes notice that they go and eat those snacks throughout the day with no real plan or no real reason. If you try to analyze why you even do that, primarily it's because of you're bored or you want to chat with someone. So make sure you mark it on your calendar that you do that around, 2 o'clock every day. So instead of going to the kitchen to grab those snacks, knowing that you always want to go for snacks around 2, schedule a walk outside with your colleagues. So at 2 o'clock we all go out, Because you honestly, primarily you want to just socialize. That may be the main cue. The cue and the trigger for you is I want to socialize. The routine is eating snacks. Replace it with something like going out. And the reward is that you socialize, you spend some time, you dealt with boredom. So have the plan for that as well. And the last part I want to mention is that keep it flexible. Establish this morning routine in the sense that you have this small win going for you right from the start of your day, because it sets this positive outlook for the day. Because I've done something already. Even if I, did some jumping jacks or did some push-ups in the morning, I already feel so much greater for the rest of the day. I can do whatever because I already did that. I had a small win in the morning. If you travel a lot, first thing people always encourage you to do, especially if you have a jet lag, is to go to the gym or go for a run, because it really, really helps you to get adjusted to a new time zone. So have that connected. If you don't do it right away, you would never do that. Bodyweight exercises are cool. Gyms are not as essential. Maybe go for a run, work out with your own body weight. And active sightseeing is something I encourage, especially again if you travel a lot, and many of us developers travel these days. Active sightseeing meaning you go for walking tour, biking tour, or any sort of tours, rather than just sitting on a butt on a bus driving somewhere. Go for a walking tour. It's always good. So let's talk about the mental fitness a bit. When it comes to mental fitness, I don't like using this word as much because it's been so popularized. But that being said, mindfulness as a whole is quite an important concept. The idea is that you're trying to clear your mind as much as you can. And why I'm saying that, and I personally struggle with this whole phrase, clearing your mind, doesn't make much sense. The only time I was actually able to understand what it means is when I was on a run. I believe I was on a run, no. I was running. I was finishing the marathon and I was exhausted. And while doing that, I was listening to the audiobook that defined this whole word of mindfulness, of, as they say, being in the moment. And because I was so exhausted, I was able to isolate myself from all those worries, the difficulties, and the just anxieties that everyone faces. And look around and see the nature where I was running. It was an awesome feeling. And then after you reach this idea and you really understand the definition of it, you can bring it to your daily life, because we all struggle with our own anxieties and problems. I sometimes, because I travel a lot, at the end of like 2 months trips, sometimes you feel like, oh, I want to go home or something like that, or like you get bored. But then you like go for a run and things go away, because you understand actually you're enjoying it while you travel, you're not going to travel as much later on in life potentially. So really try to think about, and running and just exercising is great for that. Try to control your emotions as well, and embracing solitude is very important too. If you're able to be alone and incorporating meditation in your life, you can easily change jobs or don't be in bad relationships anymore, because you're not afraid of being alone. So often we stay in a job that we don't like or relationships that we don't want to be in because we don't want to be alone. It's just the habit of it, even though we know it's bad for all of us. So you have to be able to cut it out really quickly, because you know that you're alone, you know yourself good enough that you don't want to be, you're not afraid of staying alone with yourself. And just talking about the clearing your mind, the way I approach it is that I try to avoid information overload that we all face these days. We try to avoid that by basically making sure that you have something like an information dump that you're trying to avoid by having a single source of truth. What I'm trying to say by that, if you read so many articles online or you scroll through Hacker News, there's so much information these days, and if you keep notes all over the place in your house, it might drive you crazy. So make sure you write it down in only a single place, like you have an Evernote application or some sort of a notepad that you keep in mind, and you control all your notes and keep in a single place, so you don't get like scattered with that. And then you actually have a single focus. And when you go to sleep, people often say, make sure you write all your thoughts before going to bed, because otherwise it's going to just be in your mind like, I don't want to forget. Make sure you write it down and go to bed with a clear mind. So keep that in your head. And this is a great book. I highly encourage you to read. It really helps out with the mental fitness. It's actually a New York Times bestseller by Mark Manson. He's just publishing a new book right now, but this one is an awesome one too. Controlling emotions. So this is the Jeremy Ashkenas. He posted this recently. So he's enjoying the sun, diving into the water, and someone made an awesome comment. By the way, Jeremy is the guy behind CoffeeScript, Backbone.js, and a bunch of other awesome stuff. So he published this picture. There was this awesome comment by a great person. I'm not going to read it, but it wasn't the best comment you would leave under someone's picture of enjoying the sun. Be positive though, it doesn't make sense to be rude for no reason whatsoever. I mean, I live in Canada now, so I might be biased. I've been said there is no reason for that. There is an art of unsent letters that's been coming from the Abraham Lincoln, as they say, where basically if you met with someone, or as it often happens at work, and you're about to send a horrible letter, an email or instant messaging to someone full of like hate and anger and potential like screw you, don't go crazy with that. Just write it down. Don't send it. Write it down again. Don't send it either. The way Abraham Lincoln was approaching it, he was writing it, put it in his drawer, never send them. It's a good approach. That being said, with emails, it can be tricky. Because if you happen to like still write it to someone with the address bar having the real email and accidentally press send, it happened. Don't do that. So be cautious of that. If you do this kind of unsent letters approach, do it offline somewhere. Focus on the improvements, like when the project ends, how they will make it better. It's good, but don't focus on that too much. Well, sometimes it's important to acknowledge success of the project. Try to celebrate people who were proactive and they already did a great job, instead of focusing how do we make it better. Talk about success as well. And give a proactive feedback, especially to junior engineers, junior people who just joining. I still remember the feedback or notes that I've gotten from the architect on my first job. It's really changing your life and you're going to remember that forever. And some talks I suggest about this topic. Brett Cannon, he talked about kindness in engineering in the On a Changelog podcast that I've linked here as well. So, about the solitude as a whole, the art of solitude, have a quiet moments. If you go in the mountains, you go for like a jog or hike, don't have a headphones on, just enjoy the weather. Flow therapy is great. It's the sensory deprivation tanks. It's awesome. It's 90 minutes, no light, no sound, like you basically suspended in salt bath. It's great. It really helps out a lot with stress and the life in general. And try to learn about yourself a bit more. And as I said before, it helps with having clear judgments, be able to change jobs, change your life with no regard and no regrets. So, because you know that you're alone is actually quite cool. You don't have to stay with someone or with some company just because you don't want to be alone. And the last point I always bring up is the meditation. Meditation is very cool. There are many different kinds. There is an unguided meditation, there is guided, active meditation, but what's important is the consistency. People who say, so when it comes to meditation, you can start with like 10 minutes or something. Make sure that you keep it consistent. Sometimes people say, I don't have 10 minutes for the meditation. If you've heard of Tony Robbins, it's the motivational speaker, he says, if you don't have minutes for yourself, you don't have life. And it's totally true. You can find 10 minutes. We spend more time on a bus or drinking coffee in between lunches, so you can definitely find time. And if you need to help getting started, there are many apps. The Headspace is great. There's a relaxed meditation app. Calm is becoming more popular. It's a free app. It's a nice one to use as well. If you're still skeptical though, this book, 10% Happier, is great as well. So, let me talk about work a little bit. So about main stresses of work, main stressors at work that we encounter is it's an office environment, the communication that we have to deal with, distractions, and project planning that we have. When it comes to the office environments, open space is horrible. This open office idea is insane. There is a reason why we always try to find an empty room to work and staying quiet. So it's a major stressor. So really consider maybe working remote, or having like working from the coffee shop or somewhere else. But open offices are not great. Office perks, where they serve you lunch, they're not perks, they're actually bribes. They bribe you for your life's force, for your time. It doesn't worth it of not going home because you're going to get dinner in the workplace every day. It doesn't make sense, so make sure you keep that in mind. Keep that it's just a bribe. There is, again, the reason why we say, oh, I did so much work on a plane. because I had no internet and no distractions. Yeah, because the open office is horrible. So if you have that kind of feeling, really try the remote work. It works a lot. It helps a lot. Because work ultimately is just work. Similar to what I've established right up front before this talk. Work, it comes and goes, but you yourself stay. So in your health, you can't really change that. This book, Remote, by DHH, and this book is great in terms of how to get started and some tips and tricks how to incorporate that, so give it a try as well. In terms of the communication, what I always try to highlight is don't go for synchronous communication, go for the so-called asynchronous communication. In other terms, what it actually means is people sometimes confuse with Slack and instant messengers. They think that the fact that it can instantly send you a message, they confuse this instant reach time with the instant response time, which is not the same. I don't have to reply to you instantly because I have a Slack, but I would never ignore you. I would eventually reply. So keep it in mind. Don't just go and reply instantly right away. Have the expectations set. That's what drives the proper remote work, is if you have expectations properly explained with your team. And have an avatar if you work in remote, like have your face or the people know you as, so people can actually humanize you a bit more. In terms of the distractions, what's important here is that mobile devices obviously is a major distraction. Noise, how do you deal with noise, and I'll talk about it in a second, is also important. Setting up boundaries in a team and getting into the zone when it comes to work is also important. So the mobile devices, before I had a device like this, bunch of pop-ups, it was insane, it was horrible. Now my phone looks like I'm a sociopath. Basically it's very organized, no pop-ups, no notifications, no work-related, even it's a work phone by the way, no work-related apps. That's how you do it. So basically you have to remove all those distractions from your phone. And what they say first is, again, arrange your applications, disable all notifications, especially after work hours. Do not disturb mode, always have it on. Nobody calls anyways these days. And put phone away. Actually, it's a real thing. If you work in front of your laptop, have your phone away at least as far as your hand goes. That actually makes a huge difference. So try it out for yourself. The noise control, they've shown that meaningless noise, like in the one you feel in Starbucks, where nobody actually taps you on the shoulder, but just a meaningless noise in the background, helps you to concentrate. Have some sound support. Have some noise cancelling apps or headphones. Like with apps, I often use Brain FM for some, focus music I want to have. Spotify, obviously, or a bunch of other apps for white noise if you want to. Noise cancellation, of course, it's going to be like earplugs, earmuffs, like the one I showed on the picture before, or some noise cancelling headphones. You want to go, fancy. And the library rules, where basically, we have a quiet time established in the team, is also quite beneficial. Keep quiet, basically. If you have a meeting, just go to the room. Have an asynchronous ping. Don't get people just pinging you on the shoulder. Make sure they send you a message first. You say, sure, let's chat, and then you chat. Establish office hours if you have experts in a team. And discuss all those rules ahead of time. Don't just assume them as an individual, talk them through. And the last part I want to talk about is the project planning, where really if your project comes up with there's a long-hanging fruit, let's implement it, it's a major stress because we've never done it before. It's hard to just implement and go for it. Dog fooding is great, still it can be an issue because you at least need to know your domain. So just implementing low-hanging fruit can be a complicated issue and major stress for you. Parkinson's law is that it's this whole idea of scope creep, where more time you have, more work you might potentially fill in. So keep that in mind and keep your time organized. And the Conway law is that if your team is not structured, your work not going to be structured. So this is another great book I recommend when it comes to work. In general, basically, I highly encourage you to read that. So with all of that, I've talked about quite a few things, all these 4 points, the fitness, work, nutrition, and sleep. Highly encourage you to try all of those and at least implement something that I've mentioned today. Gotchas-wise, of course, it's hard to implement those. There are quite a few. But make sure you're not dogmatic in your changes. Make sure you do it, experiment and try it out for yourself. Don't jump in too fast. Have goals ahead of time. Do it for someone, maybe for yourself. And don't find your nature. Try to work with yourself. There is another great book I recommend, Own Your Day, and I have links in the slides. And with so much information, what I want to really say is call for action for you guys. Find purpose, be inspired and inspire others, and enjoy your life. So with that, I'm out of time, and thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that.